I was about 13 when my family went on our annual trip to Poland to visit family. My mother and father both come from a small rural village about 2 to 3 hours away from Warsaw. It's an idyllic little place that is surrounded by lush forest and wheat fields. Life is different there. Everyone is very carefree and relaxed. Being the small place it is, everyone knows one another since everyone essentially lives on the same street. I had made a bit of a reputation for myself there, being known as the American girl who visits in the summers, so whenever we would arrive, the whole village would know. I loved the attention. All the kids wanted to play, and adults doted on me. One of the town's people I saw most frequently was Tomek. Tomek was a funny guy in his upper 20s who would work in the village deli store. He would always give me extra meat anytime my grandparents would send me out to pick food up or offer to show me inside the kitchen. I never took him up on that offer. The idea of seeing how my meat was made was too much for my 13-year-old mind. Though I didn't know it at the time, Tomek had the reputation of being the town lunatic. He wasn't a stranger to the police force or the villagers, as he was a bit of a petty thief. My grandparents told me when I got older that my grandfather had not once but twice caught him trying the doors of his shed and then excusing himself when caught, saying he was drunk and unsure where he was. Despite this, I had never had a reason to fear or avoid him. The village had a tradition called Grav Odvaga, which translates to the game of courage, that would fall in between the dates of our visits. On this day, the village children would be set into teams and then given items to find that were hidden around the woods and/or village parameters. The event lasted all day, and the group that had the most found items would win a prize. The courage part of the game would be trying to attain the golden item, which would be in the woods and guarded by a few adults armed with water guns. The only way to get the golden item was to avoid being sprayed with water. If all members of a team were hit, then the team would lose the chance to attain it. My team consisted of my 4 friends, Iwa, Arek, Bartek, and Paweł. Our strategy was to get as many of the items around town and then try our luck at the golden object when it got darker in order to be harder to spot. We got a lot of the items throughout the day and worked up a good sweat after racing against the other children. Around 7 p.m., we had attained 12 items and were ready to try our luck at the golden item. We had heard from the other children that the adults were being relentless, guarding the object with ferocity. The wooded area that was the destination as the golden item area was behind Iwa's house. Therefore, he took the lead in devising the plan. Our plan was that we were going to split up into 2 teams. Arek, Iwa, and Bartek were meant to grab the adults' attention and drive them away as far as possible, while Paweł and I would sneak in and grab the item. Feeling confident, we headed into the forest as the sun was slipping from the sky. We followed the dirt path for about 5 minutes and then stepped off it, following Iwa as he navigated through the shrubbery with ease. He stopped us just as we reached a thick clump of bushes, putting a finger to his lips. He motioned for us to look through the gaps in the shrubbery and see the adults. It was dark now, so it was hard to see who was actually guarding the items, but we could make out 4 shapes huddled together, chatting softly. Without hesitation, we moved into our plan of action. Our 3 friends navigated around and disappeared from our sight, only for us to hear their laughs and the voices of adults yelling to get them. Paweł and I watched as the adults raced after our friends, all abandoning the area they had stood around. I remember glancing around and getting ready to jump out of the bushes when I felt Paweł's arm on my shoulder and saw him make a shushing sound. They might not all be gone. Wait a bit, he urged. We sat quietly, listening intently for any sounds. Then it happened, the slightest sound of something moving on the other side of the clearing. We couldn't make out who or what it was, so we stayed quiet, peering through the gaps of the shrubbery. Paweł saw it first. He pointed out what looked like a dark figure crouching behind a tree closest to the clearing. We watched as the figure moved tree to tree, never stepping out from behind, just simply observing. Just as I was about to suggest that one of us should cause a distraction, we heard a yelp and turned to see another team approaching, clearly happy that there seemed to be no one around where the golden item should be. We watched as this small group of 2 raced around the clearing but didn't pick anything up. I kept waiting for the adult to step out and spray the kids, but the figure remained crouched, half visible behind the trees. One of the girls approached the area the adult was in, but she was busy looking up at the tree, musing to her partner that maybe the object was put on a branch. We watched as she began pulling herself up the lowest branch, and I remember the way my stomach dropped when all of a sudden we saw the adult shoot out behind the tree, grab her leg, and start pulling her into the darkness of the forest. Her partner ran off screaming, leaving me and Powwow unsure what to do. We watched, frozen with horror, as the adult began covering the girl's mouth in some attempt to silence her. Before either one of us could do anything, all of a sudden, Tomek came running up the path and threw himself onto the man. Powwow shot out to help Tomek while I ran back to call for help. When I reached the backyard that was the destination spot for the end of the game, I was screaming uncontrollably in a mix of words that took me a few attempts to get out that help was needed. A large group of the men raced toward the forest while I hid in my mother's arms, awaiting to see everyone arrive back safely. My friends, Arek, Iwa, and Bartek, approached me cautiously and asked what had happened and why Powwow and I hadn't come back. It had turned out that after Ewa, Bartek, and Arek had distracted the adults and drove them away, the adults had decided to end the time to get the gold item. They had assumed that everyone had a chance to try to get it and didn't want the kids wandering the forest after dark. One of the adults had already pocketed the item when they chased our group back towards the main backyard. My team had assumed that we would see that there was nothing there in return as well, which is why they didn't come looking for us. As I retold what happened, everyone in the backyard listened to me with wide eyes. About 10 minutes passed, and we saw the group of men coming back, Powwow walking beside his father, and the girl who had been attacked in the arms of her assumed father. As they all approached, I asked Powwow what had happened as the parents gathered and talked in hushed voices. Powwow described to us how Tomek had beaten the guy bloody but let him escape when he turned away, surprised by the men that had arrived to help. He mentioned that a few men were still out scouting the forest land for the guy. I then asked the remainder of my friends why help was not sent earlier by the girl's partner that had run away screaming. Everyone had looked at me with blank faces, and the sudden realization hit me hard. The next events become a blur. It's a mix of me racing to my parents with my friends and asking about the girl, a frenzy of people calling out her name and begging her to come out, a whirlwind of everyone rushing to get their kids inside, and a mayhem of adults swarming together to go search the woods again and call the police. It's been 8 years now, and she hasn't been found. Tomek was one of the main suspects, believed to be part of a 2-man kidnapping operation, but backed out when he saw that too much attention was brought to the event. I'm not sure whatever happened to him, but I can't help but feel guilty that I didn't do anything to help either of those girls. I saw the girl run away. Powwow and I were the last to see her. Sometimes when I see a child with braided hair, I get thrown back to that night, and I can still see her braids swirling around her as her figure disappeared from sight. Moving to a new apartment is supposed to be exciting, right? New beginnings, fresh starts, and all that jazz. I thought I was stepping into something great when I found this cozy little place on the 3rd floor. The walls were painted a soft beige, and the sunlight streamed through the windows like a warm hug. I was ready to settle in, throw a few housewarming parties, and maybe even meet my neighbors. Little did I know I was about to stumble into a nightmare wrapped in a friendly smile. My first encounter with the neighbor, Greg, happened on a sunny afternoon as I was hauling boxes up the stairs. He appeared out of nowhere, offering to help me with my things. He had this disarming grin and an easygoing manner that made me feel at ease. I thought, what a nice guy, as he lugged my heavy boxes up 2 flights of stairs without breaking a sweat. We chatted about the neighborhood, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I figured I hit the neighbor jackpot. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into my routine. I'd come home from work, drop my bag on the kitchen counter, and binge-watch terrible reality TV shows. Greg would often pop by to say hello, bringing snacks or sharing stories about the building. He seemed harmless, even sweet. But then, the little things started happening. At first, it was the keys. I could have sworn I left them on the kitchen counter, but they'd vanish, only to turn up in the bathroom drawer or under the couch. I brushed it off as being forgetful, but the feeling of unease began to creep in. Then came the noises at night. It started as soft shuffling, a sound that could easily be dismissed as the building settling. But the longer it went on, the more it felt like someone was moving around in my apartment while I slept. One afternoon, I came home to find my favorite mug sitting oddly on the table, slightly out of place. I knew I had put it in the cupboard that morning. Little things like that began to pile up, and I felt a nagging sensation in the back of my mind. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. After all, Greg was my friend, right? He wouldn't do anything to hurt me. One night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to do a little investigating. I tiptoed around my apartment, peering into corners, checking under the bed. I convinced myself that I would find the source of my unease, a misplaced item perhaps. Instead, I found nothing. Just my messy apartment staring back at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like a cold hand gripping my spine. So, I decided to confront Greg. I thought maybe I could just ask him if he had noticed anything strange. We were friends after all, right? So I knocked on his door, my heart racing. He opened it with that same warm smile, inviting me in. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Oh, just wanted to check in. Have you noticed anything weird lately? Like noises or stuff being moved around?" I blurted out, trying to sound casual. He chuckled, a little too heartily. "Nah, you're just getting used to the old building. It creaks and groans. It's nothing to worry about." He waved it off, but something about the way he was looking at me made my stomach churn. I managed a weak smile and retreated back to my apartment, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back. Days passed, and I barely saw him. The noises continued, but I became more vigilant. I started locking my doors, even when I was home. One evening, I decided to take a break from my routine and watch a movie. Halfway through, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of shuffling. My heart raced as I paused the film and listened. I was convinced that someone was in my apartment. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the sound, breath hitching in my throat. My eyes darted around, scanning every shadow. But just as I was about to turn on the light, I heard the unmistakable sound of my front door creaking open. Panic surged through me like ice water. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the coffee table and quietly moved toward the entrance. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the noise. I stood there frozen, waiting to see who would walk in. To my horror, it was Greg. He stepped inside, seemingly oblivious to my presence. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I swung the candlestick, but he caught my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, confusion and anger flaring in his eyes. I yanked my arm away, heart racing, and I took a step back. "Why are you in my apartment?" I shouted, the panic rising inside me. He laughed, the sound echoing eerily. "Relax, I was just checking on you. I thought you might need some company." It was then that I noticed something glinting on the table, my favorite mug. The very one I thought I had misplaced. I felt sick as I realized the truth. The missing keys, the noises, the feeling of being watched, it all clicked into place. I turned to run, but he moved faster, blocking my path. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low, almost soothing in a way that made it worse. "I've been looking out for you. You're special to me." I backed up against the wall, panic clawing at my throat. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "Get away from me!" I screamed, but he simply smiled, a twisted grin that sent chills down my spine. In that moment, I noticed a glimmer under the couch. With a trembling hand, I reached down and pulled out a small device, a hidden camera. My breath caught in my throat as realization washed over me. He had been watching me, recording my every move. "Greg, please," I begged, my voice trembling with fear. "This isn't okay." He stepped closer. "You don't get it, do you? I just want to keep you safe." I pushed past him, racing toward the door, but he grabbed my arm again, this time with a grip that felt like iron. "You can't leave," he hissed. Desperation surged within me and I fought back, breaking free and bolting for the door. I flung it open and sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I was outside, breathless and shaking. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing. Greg was gone, leaving no trace of his twisted obsession behind. I was left with the haunting knowledge that he had been living right next door, watching me every moment, collecting pieces of my life like trophies. I moved out the next day, but the feeling of his eyes on me never truly left. Somewhere out there, he still lurks, waiting for another chance to find his next special friend. This is a real story that has absolutely traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university. I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents because the situation at home was starting to become too toxic for me. I was ready for a fresh start, you know? In my first year at uni, I moved into a student accommodation and met some really great people. It was a good year, and I ended up meeting my boyfriend, who I'm still with now. We were just enjoying our time away from family and discovering what independence really meant. It felt like freedom, like I could finally breathe. But then, second year rolled around and I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations. At least we had our own place and weren't restricted by the noise and parties like we were in that cramped, shared flat during first year. Now I had a ground floor room and my window opened up to this tiny backyard. I would go out there to smoke every day because, yeah, I'm a smoker. There was this thin wooden door leading to the street where we tossed our bins and broken chairs and all that junk. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard, but since it was old as hell, we had to attach some strings to keep it shut. We had neighbors on each side of the house, surrounded by families and other student accommodations. The guys on the right were 5 boys who looked way too old to be in university. They were strange, to say the least. I met one of them outside our house one day during a police intervention because one of his flatmates attacked him and the others with a kitchen knife and burned their kitchen down. I heard screams and ran out with my flatmates, and there he was, covered in blood, cuts all over his arms, and a nasty wound on his head from the knife. We were all in shock, unsure of what to do, but we offered to help him clean up and even gave him an old t-shirt to change out of his bloody clothes. It was a surreal scene. And then we saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and put into a van. They drove him off to be arrested, and honestly, I didn't know anything else about that story. The police didn't share much. Anyway, the guy we helped was pretty weird. He kept rambling a lot of bullshit and trying to flirt with me. During all of this, we noticed he smoked a lot of marijuana. But honestly, we just wanted to make sure he was okay. We didn't know him, so we were just being decent human beings. After some time passed, I'd go to uni and come back home, and I'd see him often in the street, but I never said a word to him again. Then one day, while I was on my way to the corner shop, he came up to me and started talking to me in this weird way. I felt uncomfortable as hell, so I just didn't respond. He then said something that made my skin crawl. "Oh, that's okay. I'll just wait in front of your house and we can talk further." Yeah. You can imagine how freaked out I was. I thought he was just joking, so I bought my drink and headed back down my street. But when I turned the corner, there he was with his flatmate, sitting on my doorstep, waiting for me. Panic set in. I went back to the corner shop and called my one guy flatmate, asking him to open the door and tell those creeps to go away. But of course he wasn't home and no one else was either. So, I literally just waited it out until they left an hour later. And then I sprinted back home and locked the front door. My front door had a glass panel on it where you could see who was standing in front of it, which didn't help my nerves at all. After this already scary encounter, I tried to avoid that guy, and for a while I mostly succeeded. But then one day, while I was out smoking in the backyard, I noticed that the wooden door, which was always closed, was wide open. The strings we put there to keep it shut were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think much of it. I just closed the door again and tied a new string, assuming it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and forgot to tie it back. The neighbors were always screaming and yelling, having fights in their house, and it often woke me and my flatmates up in the middle of the night. Eventually, we kinda got used to it, but it was still unsettling. One evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually did. He usually never wakes up because of noise, but this night was different. He jolted awake in the middle of the night because of a loud bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, So he very quietly shook me awake, and we both just laid there in the dark, listening for any other noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door bang open and footsteps right next to my window. I always kept my window open because it would get stuffy inside, but now it felt like an open invitation for trouble. We both froze. Then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly as if they were trying to get inside. Then it stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed, so they couldn't see us, but we were on high alert, ready to get dressed and bolt if they came in through the window. Then, we heard my window move and get pushed open more, and one of the guys uttered something in a language we didn't understand. Panic shot through me as I realized they were actually trying to get in. My boyfriend and I shot up out of bed, grabbed my phone, threw on some clothes, and ran out of the room and out of the house. I called my flatmates, telling them to lock themselves in their rooms before dialing the police. Luckily, they arrived in under 5 minutes since their headquarters were just a couple of streets away. I don't remember much after the police came. I think me and my boyfriend were in shock, just standing there like deer in headlights. They ended up catching one guy, while the other fled and was later found a few streets up, smoking weed like nothing had happened. The police told us they went inside their house and found a stash of meth and heroin, plus they were carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused. I hadn't done anything to offend my neighbors or provoke them, so the thought of them breaking in with who knows what intentions terrified me and my boyfriend. The 2 guys got arrested, and one of them was sentenced to 2 years for carrying a weapon with intent to harm. After that, I never heard anything else from the police. I moved back home a few months later because I was so scared. It tormented me for months on end, not knowing what would have happened if my boyfriend hadn't woken up that night. I'm still coping with it, and it's tough. I constantly find myself asking, what if? And what would have happened if? Now I wake up at the slightest noise, and I have horrible nightmares. But hey, at least I'm still with my boyfriend, and we often talk about it, which helps a lot. It's just a reminder of how quickly life can turn upside down, and how you never really know who lives next door.